The Great Hall of Prime was built to make visitors feel small. Its crystal walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, catching the light of three suns and breaking it into rainbows that danced across the thousands of delegates gathered below. Representatives from 200 species filled the chamber, their bodies as different as the worlds they came from. Some floated in anti-gravity fields. Others breathed through masks that filtered the air into something their lungs could use. A few existed only as projections, their true forms too large or too strange to travel. Ambassador stood at the center of it all, a single human woman facing the judgment of a galaxy. She was 53 years old, with gray streaking her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. For 20 years, she had served as humanity's voice in the galactic concord. She had fought for every scrap of recognition, every trade agreement, every small step toward the full membership that Earth had been promised for 3 centuries. Today, she knew, all of that work would mean nothing. The High Speaker rose from its throne of living chitin. The creature stood 12 feet tall, its compound eyes reflecting its image 1,000 times over. When it spoke, its voice buzzed through translation devices worn by every delegate. The conquered recognizes the motion brought before this assembly. The elder species have called for a vote on the status of humanity within our great union. Felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her face calm. She had learned long ago that aliens watched human expressions carefully. They found humans disturbingly easy to read. The representative drifted forward next. It was a being made of light and gas, constantly shifting colors that their translators interpreted as speech. We have observed humanity for 300 of their years. We have seen enough. They breed without restraint. They spread to every world they can reach. They take technologies meant for peaceful use and turn them into weapons. They ask too many questions, added the delegate. The silicon-based creature looked like a statue carved from volcanic glass, but its voice rang like struck metal. They probe into matters that do not concern them. They refuse to accept their place in the natural order. Stepped forward. I request the right to speak in defense of my species. The hall fell silent. 10,000 alien eyes turned toward her. Speak, the said. Took a deep breath. She had prepared for this moment for months, ever since the rumors had started. She had written and rewritten her speech dozens of times. Now, standing in the light of 3 suns, she threw away every prepared word. You call us aggressive, she said. But when the plague swept through the outer colonies, it was human doctors who found the cure. When the drift pirates threatened shipping lanes for 50 years, it was human soldiers who volunteered to hunt them down. When the Forge world of suffered a core breach, it was human engineers who sealed the fracture and saved 3 billion lives. She turned slowly, meeting as many alien gazes as she could. You say we breed too fast, but we settle worlds that no other species wants. We live in places you consider wastelands. We ask only for the scraps of the galaxy, and we turn them into gardens. The flickered angrily. You twist your aggression into pretty words, but we see the truth. Wherever humanity goes, humanity dominates. In 500 years, you will outnumber us all. In 1,000, you will rule. Is that what this is about? Asked quietly, fear. The silence that followed was her answer. The vote took less than an hour. 847 species voted to expel humanity from the galactic concord. 12 voted against. The rest abstained. Stood frozen as the numbers appeared on the great display above the chamber. She had expected to lose, but not like this. Not by so much. The High Speaker delivered the sentence. Humanity is hereby stripped of all status within the concord. All human colonies outside the Sol system are to be evacuated within 50 standard years. All human vessels will surrender to conquered authority for inspection and impoundment. All humans currently residing in conquered space will be returned to there. You cannot do this, said, her voice barely a whisper. There are millions of us out there, families, children, lives built over generations. "The decision is final," they replied. "Humanity will return to its cradle. There it will remain." The next 50 years were chaos. Watched it all from Earth, powerless to stop any of it. Conquered ships arrived at human colonies with armed escorts. Families that had lived on alien worlds for 100 years were given days to pack their belongings. Those who resisted were taken by force. The gentle fiction that the conquered was a union of equals died in those years, replaced by the naked truth that it was an empire ruled by elder species who tolerated others only when convenient. 16 million humans died during the evacuation. Some were killed in accidents as overcrowded ships rushed back to Sol. Others died when colony systems failed without proper shutdown procedures. A few thousand simply refused to leave and were never heard from again. Became one of the leaders of the refugee crisis, organizing housing for the displaced, fighting for resources that Earth barely had. She aged 20 years in 10. She buried friends, colleagues, and her own brother who had lived on a station in the system and never survived the journey home. On the last day of the evacuation period, stood at the main spaceport of New Singapore, watching the final ships arrive. The conquered had sent observers to confirm that humanity was fully contained. They stood in their environmental suits, watching with alien eyes that showed no guilt. A young officer approached. She did not recognize him, but something in his eyes made her pause. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "there is a shuttle waiting for you. The Council requests your presence." "What Council? The Earth government dissolved 3 years ago." The officer smiled, and something in that smile sent a chill down spine. "Not that Council, Ambassador. A different one. The one that has been preparing for this moment since before you were born." She followed him to a private hangar, her mind spinning with questions. The shuttle that waited there was unlike any human vessel she had seen, sleek and dark, with no visible engines or markings. As they rose through the atmosphere, looked down at Earth. Then she looked up and gasped. The moon was covered in construction scaffolding. Mars glowed with the light of 1,000 industrial sites. And in high orbit, shipyards that should not exist were building vessels that dwarfed anything the conquered possessed. Her comm unit crackled with a voice she did not recognize. "Welcome home, Ambassador. The Council of Shadows has been expecting you. We have much work to do, and now, at last, we can begin." Stared at the impossible construction around her, and for the first time in 50 years, she felt something she had forgotten. Hope. Director stood in a control room buried 3 miles beneath the frozen surface of Titan. Above him, methane seas churned in endless storms. Around him, screens displayed information that would have seemed like magic to the humans of old Earth. He was 112 years old, though he looked no more than 40. The treatments had seen to that. Every human received them now, part of the standard medical package that had quietly extended human to 4 centuries or more. The elder species of the conquered lived for thousands of years. They had mocked humanity's brief lives, calling them mayflies, creatures that burned bright and died before they could gain wisdom. They would not be laughing much longer. "Status report," said his assistant, a young woman named who had been born on one of the hidden colony worlds, pulled up a holographic display. "The Cedar Fleet has confirmed establishment of Colony World 100. Population is at sustainable levels. Industrial capacity will reach full output within 18 months. 100 worlds, 100 secret colonies scattered across the galactic rim, in territories so distant and so worthless that no conquered species had ever bothered to claim them. Each world was home to millions of humans. Each was connected to Earth through the drift gates, humanity's own version of faster-than-light travel. The conquered used jump rings, massive structures that tore holes in space and left energy signatures that could be detected from light years away. The drift gates left no trace at all. Ships simply vanished from one location and appeared at another, silent as ghosts. remembered the early days of his career when he had been a junior researcher on the project. The lead scientist had been an old woman named Dr. Sarah, grandmother of the girl who would one day become humanity's greatest general. Sarah had spent 60 years studying every piece of alien technology humanity had ever touched, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. "They made a mistake," she had told once. "They let us work on their ships, their stations, their systems. They thought we were too primitive to understand what we were seeing, but we understood. We understood everything, and we took notes." Now those notes had become an empire. The conquered still sent inspection ships to Earth every few years. They expected to find a dying species, slowly withering in its cradle. What they found was exactly what they expected to find, because humanity had become very good at theater. The surface populations had been carefully managed to show decline. Cities that had once held millions now held thousands. Factories stood silent and empty. The humans the inspectors met were old and tired, speaking of lost glories and fading hope. It was all a lie. The true population was not in the cities. It was underground, in vast habitats carved from the bones of the earth itself. It was on the dark side of the moon, in structures hidden from any angle the conquered ships might approach. It was on Mars, beneath the red dust, where 20 billion humans lived in endless warrens of tunnels and chambers. And it was out there, among the stars, in the 100 colony worlds and the thousands of stations, and the millions of ships that made up the Shadow Empire. Walk to a window that looked out into an underwater hangar. A ship rested there, being fitted with the latest improvements. It was called the Prometheus, named for the Titan who had stolen fire from the gods to give to humanity. "How many?" he asked. Checked her data. Active fleet stands at 42,000 vessels of various classes. The reserve fleet adds another 100,000, though most of those are older models kept for emergency use. The Genesis worlds have begun production of the new Dreadnought class. First units will be combat-ready within 5 years. The Genesis worlds still felt a chill when he thought about them. They were not planets in any traditional sense. They were mobile habitats, artificial worlds the size of small moons, each one capable of supporting billions of humans and manufacturing war material indefinitely. They moved through the void on engines that bent gravity itself, appearing and disappearing at will. There were 12 of them now. Each one was a nation unto itself. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a new figure entering the control room. She was old now, truly old, nearly 2 centuries in age and looking every year of it. But her eyes were still sharp, still fierce. "Ambassador," said, "I did not expect you today." Smiled, "I am not an ambassador anymore, Director. I have not been for a very long time." She walked slowly to stand beside him at the window. "I came to see the Prometheus. They tell me it will be the flagship of the new fleet." "It will. The largest vessel humanity has ever built. 20 kilometers from bow to stern. Crew of 50,000. Enough firepower to glass a continent." Was quiet for a moment. "When I was young, I begged the conquered for scraps. I smiled and bowed and told them we only wanted to be good neighbors." Her voice hardened. "They threw us away like garbage. They stole our homes and murdered our children and left us to rot." "They did," agreed. "Do you know what keeps me alive, Director? At my age, I should have let go long ago, but I cannot. Not yet. I need to see their faces when they realize what we have become." Understood. He felt the same fire in his own heart, the cold anger that had driven humanity for 100 years. But there was something else too, something that had grown alongside the rage. Pride. Humanity had done the impossible. Cast out and abandoned, they had built something greater than anything the conquered had ever achieved. Not through cruelty or conquest, but through ingenuity, determination, and an absolute refusal to surrender. "The Council of Shadows meets tonight," said. "We will be discussing Phase 3. Turned to look at him. The reveal. Not yet, but soon. We have received reports of something troubling at the edge of conquered space, something that might force our hand earlier than planned. What kind of something? Pulled up a holographic display. It showed a star system that had once been home to a minor conquered species called the. The system was empty now. Not abandoned. Empty. The planets were still there, but they had been stripped bare. Every trace of life, every building, every ship, every body all gone. We do not know what did this, said. But whatever it was, it is moving toward conquered core space, and it is hungry. Studied the display for a long moment. Then she laughed, a dry and bitter sound. They cast us out because they feared what we might become. Now something worse is coming, and they will have to face it without us. She paused. Unless we choose otherwise. That is what the Council will decide, whether to let the conquered fall or to save the species that tried to destroy us. Turned back to the window, watching the Prometheus float in its underwater dock, a weapon built by 100 years of patient fury. Whatever we decide, she said quietly, we will decide it as an empire, and the galaxy will never forget what humanity can do when it has no choice but to survive. The burned for 3 days before it died. High Speaker watched from an evacuation shuttle as the creatures swarmed over the cities her ancestors had built 10,000 years ago. They moved like a living tide, billions of them, each one a nightmare of metal and flesh twisted together. They did not destroy. They consumed. Buildings, vehicles, and people vanished into their endless mouths, broken down into raw material and absorbed into the swarm. The conquered had never faced anything like this. Their weapons, designed for wars against civilized species, were useless against an enemy that felt no fear and knew no strategy except hunger. For every creature they killed, 10 more emerged from the biomass they had already consumed. The Devourers, the survivors called them, monsters from beyond the galaxy, driven by a hunger that could never be satisfied. In 6 months they had consumed 12 worlds, the Maid 13. Had been High Speaker for only 2 years, appointed after her predecessor had died in the fall of the colony world threshold. She was young by standards, barely 3 centuries old. She had inherited a conquered that was falling apart. They had retreated to their core systems, surrounding themselves with defensive fleets and abandoning their outer territories. They fought with their usual stubborn courage, but even their silicon bodies could be broken, their forge worlds shattered and consumed. The elder species who had ruled the galaxy were losing. High Speaker, her aide said quietly, there is one option we have not considered. Turned her compound eyes toward him. Speak. The humans in Saul. A cold silence filled the shuttle. The other passengers, refugees from the, turned to stare. The humans are finished, said. We made certain of that a century ago. What help could they possibly offer? Unknown, High Speaker, but they are the only species we have not approached, and they were always resourceful. Remembered the vote. She had been a junior delegate then, one of hundreds who had raised their appendages in favor of expulsion. She remembered the human ambassador, the small, fierce woman who had stood alone against the judgment of a galaxy. They had been so certain then that they were doing the right thing. Humanity was dangerous. Humanity had to be contained. For the safety of all, the humans had to go back to their cradle and stay there. Now the conquered was dying, and the humans were the only ones left to ask for help. Set course for Saul, said. The delegation arrived 3 weeks later, had brought representatives from a dozen species, including an observer and a war master. They expected to find a broken species, perhaps willing to trade their meager resources for a chance at survival. They found something very different. The shuttle approached Earth through normal space, following the course the humans had transmitted. As they passed the orbit of Jupiter, noticed something strange. The gas giant's moons were covered in lights, millions of lights, arranged in patterns that suggested cities. That is not possible, the War Master said. Our surveys showed no significant human presence beyond Earth and Mars. Your surveys were a century old, the shuttle pilot replied. They continued inward. Mars was green. Not entirely, but large patches of the red planet had been transformed, covered in vegetation that should not have been able to survive. Orbital stations circled the world, dozens of them, each one larger than anything the conquered had built. And then they saw Earth. The cradle of humanity glowed with light. Cities covered every continent, connected by transportation networks that spanned the globe. In orbit, thousands of ships moved in careful patterns, military vessels and cargo haulers and passenger liners serving a population that clearly numbered in the tens of billions. This is impossible, whispered. We contained them, we watched them for a century, they were dying. You watched what we wanted you to see, a human voice said over the comm. Welcome to the Sol system, High Speaker. Admiral will receive you aboard the observation station. Please follow the guidance beacon. The observation station was modest by the standards they had seen, a simple wheel-shaped structure with large windows facing outward. Admiral met them in the main gallery, a small woman with gray hair and a face that showed no emotion. Approached her with as much dignity as she could manage. Admiral, the conquered faces a grave threat. We have come to request humanity's assistance. Smiled, it was not a friendly smile. I know why you have come, High Speaker. We have been watching the Devourers for some time. Then you know how desperate our situation is. We are prepared to offer generous terms. Full restoration of humanity's membership, territorial concessions, whatever you require. I see. Turn to face the window. Tell me, High Speaker, when you voted to expel humanity, did you imagine this moment? Did you think about what might happen if you ever needed our help? Felt her thorax tighten. We did what we thought was necessary for galactic stability. You did what you thought was necessary to maintain your power. His voice was cold. You feared us. You feared what we might become. So you tried to destroy us slowly, quietly, where no one would notice. We did not try to destroy you. 16 million humans died during the evacuation. Children, families, people whose only crime was being born in the wrong place, turned back to face the delegation. We remember every single one of them. The War Master stepped forward. We did not come here to argue about the past. The Devourers will consume your species as easily as they consume ours. Help us, and you help yourselves. Laughed. You still do not understand. She raised her hand and pressed a control on her wrist. This is not an observation station. This is the observation deck of the Terran flagship Terra, and this is not a request for help. This is a revelation. The windows flickered and the view changed. What had seemed like empty space suddenly filled with ships. Massive vessels, each 1 kilometer long, materialized out of nothing as their stealth systems disengaged. They kept appearing, hundreds of them, thousands, until the void was crowded with metal and light. Could not speak, could not move, could only stare at the impossible fleet that surrounded them. 1,100 capital ships, said, 40,000 support vessels, 12 mobile fortress worlds, each one home to 3 billion humans, a population of 2 trillion spread across 1,000 colony worlds. This is the Terran Shadow Empire. We have been building it for a century, waiting for the day when we would reveal ourselves. Why managed? Why show us this now? Expression softened slightly. Because the Devourers are everyone's enemy. Because we are not monsters, no matter what you try to make us. And because humanity has decided that revenge is less satisfying than proving you wrong about who we are. She stepped closer close enough that her human eyes met this compound gaze directly. We will save your conquered, High Speaker. We will destroy the Devourers or die trying. But we will do it on our terms, in our way. And when it is over, the galaxy will never look at humanity the same way again. felt her legs weaken. She had come here expecting to negotiate with a dying species. Instead, she had found an empire that could crush the conquered without breaking a sweat. And that empire had chosen mercy. "What do you require of us?" she asked. Smiled again, and this time there was warmth in it. "Only that you watch. Watch and learn what humanity can do when we have nothing left to lose. Then, when this is over, we will talk about the future." She turned and walked toward the door. "The war begins tomorrow. I suggest you find somewhere safe to observe. It will be unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen." General stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Prometheus, watching the planet below transform into hell. The world was called Haven by the conquered species who had once lived there. It had been a paradise, a garden world of blue oceans and green forests. Now it writhed with devourer swarms, its surface crawling with the horrors that had consumed its population. 3 billion people had lived on Haven. Now they were part of the enemy. "All units in position," her tactical officer reported. "Ground forces ready for deployment, fleet standing by." Nodded. She was 60 years old, though she looked half that age. Her grandmother had been Dr. Sarah, the scientist who had helped build the foundations of the Shadow Empire. Her mother had commanded the first Genesis world. War and preparation ran in her blood. "Begin the operation," she said. The Terran fleet moved like a single organism. This was the power of the lattice, the neural network that connected every human mind. When saw the battlefield, every soldier under her command saw it too. When one pilot discovered a weakness in the enemy formation, that knowledge spread to every other pilot instantly. The conquered had always fought as individuals, brilliant commanders leading ordinary soldiers. Humanity fought as one. Drop pods rained down on Haven like metal tears. Each one carried a squad of Terran Marines, soldiers whose bodies had been enhanced with technology that made them stronger, faster, and harder to kill than any unmodified human. They wore armor that could withstand direct hits from plasma weapons. They carried rifles that fired projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. But their most important feature was invisible. Every Marine carried what was called the Final Protocol, a small device implanted at the base of the skull, connected to every cell in the body. If the Marine died, the device activated. In less than a second, it would break down the entire body at the molecular level, leaving nothing but ash. The Devourers grew stronger by consuming their enemies. Against humanity, there would be nothing to consume. Crystalline 7 Echo watched the battle from an observation vessel. The Silicon being had been assigned to document human tactics, to learn how this impossible species fought their wars. What it witnessed everything it had been taught about combat. The humans did not simply fight the Devourers. They studied them. In the middle of battle, with death all around them, Terran scientists captured specimens for analysis. They dissected living creatures while their comrades held the swarm at bay. They collected data with the same calm focus they might use in a laboratory. "What are they looking for?" Echo's commander asked. "Unknown," Echo replied, "but they are clearly searching for something specific." The battle for Haven lasted 3 days. In the end, the Terran forces had cleared 90% of the planet's surface. The Devourers that remained were contained in isolated pockets, surrounded by fields that disrupted their ability to communicate with each other. It was a victory, but it was only the beginning. Over the next 2 years, the war spread across 1,000 star systems. The Devourers adapted, as they always did, learning from each defeat and evolving new strategies. They began to target human supply lines, striking at the ships that carried food and ammunition to the front lines. The Genesis worlds answered. These mobile fortresses moved through the void, appearing wherever they were needed, manufacturing replacement supplies faster than the Devourers could destroy them. For every ship the enemy destroyed, 3 more emerged from the Genesis world factories. Echo continued to observe. They had formed an alliance with the Terran Empire, contributing their forge worlds to the war effort. It was a strange partnership, silicon and carbon working together against a common enemy. But it worked. One day, Echo was summoned to a meeting aboard the Terra. Admiral herself had requested the observer's presence. The meeting room was small, filled with humans in military uniforms. Echo recognized General and several other high-ranking officers. At the center of the table was a holographic display showing a devourer creature, frozen in the moment of capture. "You have been watching us for 2 years," said. "You have seen how we fight. Now we want to show you something else." She activated the display. The image expanded, showing the internal structure of the devourer. Echo had seen such dissections before, but this was different. Certain areas were highlighted, pulsing with light. "Neural clusters," explained. "We found them 6 months ago. The devourers are not mindless. They have a form of collective intelligence distributed across the entire swarm. These clusters are the nodes of that intelligence." "You wish to destroy them?" Echo asked. "No," smiled. "We want to talk to them." Echo felt its crystal structure vibrate with shock. "Talk to the creatures that have consumed hundreds of worlds, that have killed trillions." "We have learned something important about the devourers," said. "They are not native to this galaxy. They came from somewhere else, somewhere very far away. They fled across the void between galaxies, running from something we do not yet understand. They consume because it is the only way they know how to survive," added. "Their original food sources were destroyed long ago. They are not evil, they are desperate." Echo considered this. They were a logical species, not given to emotion, but even they had felt hatred for the devourers, for the mindless destruction they brought. To hear that there might be a reason behind the horror was difficult to accept. "What do you propose?" Echo asked. "Project Communion," said. "We have developed a way to interface with the devourer neural network, to communicate with whatever intelligence guides them. Yesterday, we made first contact." She activated another display. It showed a recording, a human woman sitting in a chamber filled with wires and screens. Her eyes were closed, her face calm. And then she spoke, but her voice was not her own. It was layered, multiple tones overlapping, like a chorus of millions speaking in unison. "We are the many, we are the hungry, we are the lost." The recording continued. The woman's face showed strain, but she kept speaking. "We did not wish to devour, we wish to live. Our home is gone, our stars are cold. We crossed the great dark to find light again. We found only fear, only weapons, only death, so we became death ourselves." Stop the recording. "They are willing to negotiate. They do not want to be monsters. They want a home." Echo stared at the frozen image on the screen. "And you believe you can give them one?" "The Genesis worlds can produce synthetic biomass indefinitely, enough to feed the entire devourer swarm without consuming another living being. We can offer them territory in the galactic rim, worlds where they can exist in peace. The conquered will never accept this." "The conquered does not have a choice." His voice was hard. "We are the ones fighting this war. We are the ones paying the price. We will decide how it ends." Echo understood then why humanity was truly dangerous. It was not their weapons or their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to see enemies as potential allies, to look at the face of horror and ask, "What do you need?" It was terrifying, and it was magnificent. "What do you require from the?" Echo asked. "Only your witness," said. "When we end this war, we want the galaxy to know how we did it, not through genocide, not through hatred, through understanding." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "They cast us out because they feared what we might become. They were right to be afraid, but they were afraid of the wrong thing." Echo watched her silhouette against the starlight, this strange, fragile creature that had built an empire from exile. "What should they have feared?" Echo asked. turned back with a smile that held no warmth but something deeper, something like pride. Our compassion, it has always been our most dangerous weapon. The Galactic Assembly met for the first time on a station built in neutral space, far from any world claimed by any species. 3 years had passed since humanity's return. The war was over. The galaxy had changed forever. Admiral stood at the central podium, looking out at the gathered delegates. There were more species represented here than had ever attended the old Concord. Not just the elder races and their client species, but newcomers as well. Species from the galactic rim who had never been invited to the Concord's table. Species that humanity had discovered during their century of secret expansion. And there was one other presence. Something that made many delegates physically uncomfortable, that caused translators to glitch and hearts to race with primal fear. The Devourer emissary floated in a specially designed chamber at the edge of the assembly. It had shaped itself into a form that was almost humanoid, a gesture of respect toward the species that had given its kind a second chance. But there was no hiding what it truly was. Millions of minds speaking with one voice. A hunger that had consumed worlds, now turned toward a different purpose. 3 years ago, the Devourers were destroying this galaxy. The Concord was falling. Hundreds of billions had died. There seemed to be no hope. She paused, letting the memory sink in. Today, the war is over. Not because we destroyed the Devourers, but because we understood them. They were refugees, fleeing a dying galaxy, driven mad by starvation and desperation. When we offered them food and territory and peace, they accepted. The Devourer emissary spoke, its layered voice echoing through the chamber. The many remember what we were, the madness, the hunger. We do not ask forgiveness for what we did. We ask only the chance to become something different. Many delegates shifted uncomfortably. The wounds were still fresh. Too many had lost families and to forget so easily. We do not expect the galaxy to welcome the Devourers as friends, continued. Trust must be earned. But they have agreed to join the lattice, to share their knowledge with all species who wish to learn. They have already begun teaching us about intergalactic travel, about the technologies they developed to survive the void between galaxies. In exchange, we feed them. The Genesis worlds produce enough synthetic biomass to sustain the entire swarm indefinitely. High Speaker rose from her seat. She had aged visibly since the war began, her chitin dulled and cracked, but her voice was still strong. The Terran Empire has saved us all, she said. This cannot be, but we must ask, what comes next? You have built the greatest military force this galaxy has ever seen. You have technologies we do not understand. What will you do with this power? Smiled, that is not for me to decide. That decision belongs to someone else. She stepped aside, and another figure approached the podium. Walked slowly, her centuries of life weighing on her despite the treatments that kept her alive. She had refused to let anyone carry her. This moment, she had said, required her to stand on her own feet. I was there when the Conquered voted to expel humanity, said. I stood in a hall much like this one and begged for mercy. I received none. The chamber was silent. Many of the elder species present remembered that day. Some had voted against humanity. They could not meet eyes. For 100 years, I waited for this moment. I dreamed of standing before you and showing you what you had created. An empire built from exile. A civilization that rose from the ashes of your cruelty. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each face. I expected to feel triumph, satisfaction, perhaps even cruelty of my own. She paused. I feel none of those things. Reached out and touched the podium, steadying herself. What I feel is tired of hatred, tired of fear, tired of the endless cycle of punishment and revenge that has defined galactic politics for. She raised her head. The Terran Shadow Empire was built for war, but I have learned in my long life that the hardest thing is not winning a war. It is choosing what to do with victory. She took a deep breath. I am here to announce that the Council of Shadows has voted to dissolve the Shadow Empire." Gasps filled the chamber. The human delegates looked at each other in confusion. This was not what they had expected. "We will not rule over you," continued. "We will not take revenge for what was done to us. We will not become the thing we hated." She smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "We will become something better. The Terran Navy will remain as a defensive force and as a contribution to galactic security. The Genesis worlds will continue to produce resources for any species that needs them, including the Devourers. The Lattice will be open to any species that wishes to join, allowing instantaneous communication and knowledge sharing across the galaxy. But we will not rule, we will not dominate. We will do what humanity has always done best. We will adapt. We will learn, we will grow, and we will help others do the same." High Speaker spoke again. "You are offering us everything, your technology, your resources, your protection. What do you ask in return?" Looked at her, this ancient enemy who had voted for humanity's exile so long ago. "We ask only for what you us 200 years ago, a place at the table, a voice in the chorus, the chance to be part of something larger than ourselves." She spread her hands. "We ask to be your partners, not your masters, not your servants, your equals." The vote was held the next day. Every species in attendance voted to admit humanity to the new Galactic Assembly as a founding member. The Devourers were granted provisional membership, with full rights to be reviewed in 50 years. The old Concord was officially dissolved, replaced by a new organization that promised equal representation for all species. Did not attend the ceremony. She was tired, she said. She had done what she needed to do, now she wanted to rest. A week later, she stood in her apartment on New Geneva, watching the stars through a window that looked out on infinity. Ships from 100 species moved through the void, working together on a project that had once seemed impossible, a gate to another galaxy, where other civilizations waited to be discovered. Her console chimed with an incoming message. She opened it and found a text communication from an address she did not recognize. It read, "Ambassador, the Council of Shadows has completed its final transition. We are no longer a government. We are now a research collective dedicated to exploration and discovery. We wanted to thank you for everything you have done." Smiled, the Council of Shadows, the organization that had found her on the day of the evacuation and given her a reason to keep living. They had started as a secret government, born from desperation and fury. Now they were something else entirely. A second message appeared beneath the first. "They expelled us because they feared what we might become. Perhaps they were right to be afraid, but we choose to make them proud instead." Felt tears forming in her eyes. She had lived for nearly 200 years, driven by anger and hope in equal measure. She had seen her species cast out and rebuilt. She had watched them become an empire and then choose to give that empire away. She had seen humanity at its worst and at its best, and in the end the best had won. She typed a reply with trembling fingers. "We were always meant for something greater than revenge. We just needed time to remember it." She sent the message and turned back to the window. Outside, the galaxy spread before her, full of dangers and wonders and possibilities beyond counting. Humanity's place in it was no longer certain, no longer defined by old grudges and older fears. It was something new, something that had never existed before, and for the first time in 200 years felt at peace. She closed her eyes and let the starlight wash over her, thinking of all the humans who had not lived to see this day. Her brother, her friends, the 16 million who had died in the evacuation. They had all paid the price for this moment. "We made it," she whispered to their memory. "We made it home." Outside the window, the first test of the intergalactic gate began. Light blossomed in the void, a doorway to somewhere new. Ships from every species in the galaxy gathered to witness it, united for the first time in history. And among them, small but proud, flew the vessels of humanity, the species that had been thrown away, the people who had built an empire in secret, the civilization that had chosen mercy over vengeance. They had altered everything, and they were only getting started.